Welcome to the Key of Imagination. This week we're going to be looking at the Twilight Zone episode, Nervous Man in a $4 Room. We're going to get a little psychological with what's happening to Jackie. We'll dive into how George is able to hold such control over our nervous protagonist. And I'll reveal my moment of awe, a personal story about my own interaction with a set of bullies from when I was younger. So, grab your keys and let's open up this door to the fifth dimension. You unlock this door with the key of imagination. As the title indicates, Jackie is indeed a nervous man. His whole life he's been pushed and dared to do things that are against his better judgment. But fear and an unwillingness to stand on his own 2 feet have led him to this dirty $4 room. Soon, a man of perceived clout will give Jackie a task, one that will move him up in the ranks, from being a petty crook to a murderer. And if Jackie is successful, there likely won't be just one man who's dead. There will be at least 2, as any remnants of the man known as Jackie Rhoades will also die that day, if not literally, at least figuratively. But there is one person who's trying to talk some sense into our Mr. Rhoades, a man close to his heart, or perhaps closer to his head. Jackie's repressed self, the man he could have been had he not given over all of his agency to others, now relegated to a life in the mirror. But Mirror Jackie has had enough. He's ready to take back the reins of their life once and for all, and after a long conversation of compassionate memories and some dark truths, Mirror Jackie finds his moment and takes control, just in time, to wallop George right in the face. No more petty crook. Jackie Rhoades is ready to begin the next chapter of his life with a renewed sense of confidence that his actions and decisions are now his own. Nervous Man in a $4 Room is directed by our old friend Douglas Hayes. The teleplay is by Rod Serling. And as for our cast, it's a pretty straightforward one. We've got Joe Mantell as our nervous man, Jackie Rhoades, and we've got William D. Gordon as George. The episode first aired on October 14th, 1960. As for our tidbits, both Martin Grams Jr. in Unlocking the Door and Mark Scott Zickrey in The Twilight Zone Companion talk about the original idea that was floated for shooting the episode. They were thinking of doing a split screen, where you have the same actors side by side with each other, and we actually still do this today. Instead, however, Hayes and the rest of the production crew decided to do it as a mirrored image with a rear projection. They shot all of the scenes of Mantell as Mirror Jackie from the front, and then they shot Mantell playing off of his mirrored self from the rear. You know, I love when people get creative and think of new ways to try and film or represent something. In this case, I think it works fine. And at some of the points when Jackie is moving around the room and the eyes are following him from his mirrored self, I think it looks pretty cool, even by our standards of today. As for my initial thoughts, they're okay. Yeah, I think all of the writing that I do for these episodes has really started to impact how I see a lot of these on my first rewatch. I've never particularly loved this episode, and I still don't, but there are some parts of it that I think I appreciate more now than I did in the past. For example, Joe Mantell's acting. When I was younger, I found his nervous ways to be somewhat annoying and off-putting. But with some years of adulthood on my bones, I realized that this is the point. The word that I think seems to be most appropriate here is sniveling at times. And you have to give it to Mr. Mantell. He plays that word incredibly well. But that's about as far as I go with my initial thought. I can talk more about the aspects that I liked and didn't quite like as much in my rating section. Question 1. Is there something more psychologically profound to Jackie's friend in the mirror? There are a lot of really interesting places to take this episode when you're talking about psychology, particularly if you're trying to extend the conversation around Jackie's relationship to his mirrored self. I want to go in what is, I hope, to be a more healthy direction, but in order to do so, we have to, once again, bring back an old friend, a psychiatrist that we've discussed before on the show, in a segment that I will simply call the Jung and the restless. Get it? As in Carl Gustav Jung, the Jung and the... what do you kids know with your fidget spinners and zucchini pastas? That's a good joke. Now, this is one of those episodes that I think suffers a bit under its own intentions. What I mean is the character of Jackie and even the mirrored image is rather two-dimensional. There isn't much to them. One is a nervous man, the other is a confident one. Of course, we can break them down even further, and we will a little bit, but they really are quite simplistic, and that's by design. They're supposed to be that way because they are essentially psychological projections or avatars of these states of being. I do think the initial brief monologue that Jackie has in front of the mirror before the other version of him appears provides us with some important context into what is about to happen. He says, "Boy, I wish I could trade you and use another model. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just the brakes, that's all. Why am I scared? Why am I all the time scared?" I like this moment because there's something very genuine about it. We have these kinds of conversations with ourselves sometimes. We might ask, why did I do that? Or why do I dislike this person? We're trying to match up the feeling and the psychological perception of something with a somewhat disjointed sense of logic and reality. To put it simply, I think Jackie is actually trying to find out why he spends the majority of his days in complete and utter fear. Now, it isn't so easy to figure out why we feel a certain way. But, as a famous character used to say, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" And if you know the answer to that question, you know exactly where we're about to go. The answer is the shadow. I didn't want to just leave all of you hanging. We're going to talk about Carl Gustav Jung's shadow archetype. Now, before we can really apply it to Jackie, we should probably get a better sense of what the shadow archetype is. According to Jungian psychologist Dr. Andy Dramalski, the shadow can be the emotion, such as anger or love, that we refuse to acknowledge and stand up for. Sometimes it is the ancestral ape that rattles the cage of our overly rational, civilized mind. It can also be the child we once were, but have lost touch with. The inner artist, musician, dancer, writer, explorer, healer, hippie, student, bum, comedian, or warrior, etc., that we have locked in the not me dungeon of our unconscious. Jung put it simply when he said that the shadow is who we are, but refuse to be. So the shadow is, in a sense, the version of us that we deem is not fit for public consumption. This is in opposition to the persona, which is the version of us that we present to the public. Mirror Jackie understands this all too well. When Jackie says, "Now I get it, I'm talking to myself." Mirror Jackie doesn't deny this at all. He says, "That's just who you're talking to. Part of yourself. The part of yourself you never let come out." So Mirror Jackie in this instance is the shadow, the figure that is inside, lying unacknowledged publicly, but always there. Now here's the kicker. The shadow does not stay completely dormant always. It bursts out of us sometimes. Did you catch that brief moment early in the episode where this actually happens? At roughly the 4:57 mark, Jackie raises his voice at George and says, "Listen, George, I'm not knocking you. I don't see why all the time you gotta knock me." He gets angry. He stands up for himself. That is the shadow coming through. You'll note, though, that right after that, Jackie immediately becomes consciously aware of what he has done and represses it right back down inside. He changes his voice, his pattern of speech, back to a submissive one. Now think about this, and it might sound like a silly question, but bear with me. Is Jackie wrong in that moment to lash out and put George in his place? No, absolutely not. This was also one of the points that Jung would try to make about the shadow. There's often really important character information hidden in there that can be quite healthy for us. Anger is not always negative. It can be focused and used to stand up to a bully, to fight on behalf of another. The problem for Jackie is that he has reserved fortitude, courage, and anger for his shadow. And so when those emotions emerge, oftentimes spontaneously, that's what I wrote. maybe that was just my shadow coming out. The problem is when the shadow does emerge spontaneously, it often does so at inopportune times that really aren't ideal for what we're trying to get across to the other party or even when we're talking to ourselves. So, what are we supposed to do with this? If you can find a way to recognize what lies within your shadow, you can begin to organize how you can incorporate it into your persona, into the daily parts of life when they are most beneficial to you. Now, there's a really interesting part of this episode that I like. When Mirror Jackie becomes the new norm, you get that final scene where nervous Jackie is still present with him, still inside of the new Jackie. But he will have to be careful. There's a time and place when one should be nervous. That's built into the very structure of our existence as humans as well. So the goal for our new Jackie, in some ways, still remains the same. He will need to learn to integrate the positive aspects of the shadow into his life, just like the rest of us. And that makes this episode, for me, a pretty interesting psychological experience. Question 2. How is George able to maintain control over Jackie this whole time? This question can be a bit simplistic if we're not careful. What I mean is, we could always simply say, George is a bully. That's the answer. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, there's a lot to that answer. George is a bully. But I actually want to come at this from the other side. I want to talk about Jackie here. In a perfect world, there would be no Georges, no individuals who prey upon the anxieties in others. But we don't live in a perfect world. And we never will. So we need to work with what we can control. And that means we need to think about Jackie. If we can figure out Jackie, there isn't a George in this world who can touch us. Now, after Jackie finally realizes that he's talking to a version of himself in the mirror, he says, I was a runt, a skinny little runt. And if you want to join a street gang, you have to go along with them. You back down, they give you the business. To this, Mirror Jackie relays what seems to be the origin story of their move toward crime, the stealing of the teacher's locket. The other students dared him to take it, and so he did. What I want to highlight in this exchange is the ways in which we give over our authority over ourselves so easily. And I'm not trying to pick on Jackie here. I think there are times when we can all have these moments when we feel like we're being pushed or nudged towards some kind of action or decision, and we're not particularly happy with it, but we go along. Why? Well, one surface answer is to avoid conflict. And conflict is a key term for us in this question. So let's make a quick stop there and then come back to our man Jackie. When I went into the research on conflict and conflict avoidance, I found an interesting book titled Conflict is Not Abuse: Overstating Harm, Community Responsibility, and the Duty of Repair by Sarah Schulman. One of her main points of the book is essentially that we need to be able to address personal conflict if we want any chance at addressing more serious global ones. And one of the first ways that we can address personal conflict is by doing a better job of recognizing the difference between our being placed in harm versus discomfort. She writes, confusing being mortal with being threatened can occur in any realm. The fact that something could go wrong does not mean that we are in danger. It means that we are alive. Mortality is the sign of life. I like this quotation because it made me think of how we conflate conflict with fight sometimes. Those are often used as synonyms, but I think when we break them down, they're quite different. You can be struggling with a conflict and not be fighting with someone. However, if you're fighting with someone, you're in a conflict. Additionally, as Schulman points out, discomfort is not mortal danger. In fact, discomfort can at times be the ideal place for us to be in. When I'm challenging my students, they often give the typical, I don't get this, or I'm really frustrated. And my response to them is often, and it doesn't always go over well, is good. That means your minds are stressed and trying to accommodate new information and skills that you didn't have before. In short, you're learning. Now, to be fair, sometimes my directions are pretty bad and I just have to eat it and own it But you know what? I have to give the students credit. If you're upfront and honest with them that oh no, those are just bad directions, that's my fault, they're really good about just kind of forgiving you and going along with an in-the-moment fix. So kudos to all the students out there who are forgiving. Let's come back to Jackie. We began this section by talking about why Jackie wanted to join a street gang. He felt small, powerless. A gang or a group of people can make an individual feel powerful, feel protected. I don't think I need to bring in peer-reviewed research to state that it can be pretty difficult for us as a species to stand alone on our own 2 feet sometimes. And so we can certainly sympathize a bit with Jackie's plight. And so, enter George. George is obviously seen as a powerful figure. He's not particularly imposing in terms of his physicality, but he can move and bend the wills of the people around him, and that is most definitely a type of power in our social world. With that type of influence over others, we can begin to see how someone like Jackie would want to be in the good graces of someone like George. But that still doesn't completely get us to our answer for why George is able to control Jackie the way that he does. For that, we're going to have to add a final element to this conversation. When we think about power dynamics between people, we tend to do so only when the conflict is at its highest point. In this play before us, we have George asking Jackie to murder a man, something that he has never done before and doesn't really want to do. And Jackie is struggling with this. If I walked up to one of you and said, "Hey, I want you to go kill that guy," you're going to say, no. And you likely won't even waste more than the breath it would take to get that one syllable out of your mouth. So when the same question is applied to Jackie, and we isolate it as a single moment, theoretically, Jackie should also be able to simply say no and move on. But he can't. Why? Because of the weight of every decision he has made before this one. Because of all the times he said yes to things he didn't really want to do. And we should think of this almost as actual physical weight. What's easier, to hold a single pound of weight for 5 minutes? Or to try and hold 15 pounds for 5 minutes? And just keep adding 1 pound at a time? We love a good dramatic moment when it's on television or in the movies, but in life, the easiest way for us to stand up to bullies and to protect our agency, our ability to make our own choices in life and live the way we want to live, is to know when to say no to the small things. To come back to the book I brought in earlier, we need to recognize the difference between a small matter and a mortal danger. The more comfortable you become with saying no to small things that you find objectionable, the less likely you are to have to face the mortal dangers that sometimes come our way. And so, how is George able to gain control over Jackie? One seemingly small decision after another. Question 3. What are your moments of awe? Watching this episode and talking about these kinds of bullying moments brought back a memory that I had. I wasn't a big bike rider, but I did have a bike that I would use occasionally. One day, some kids came by and stole my bike. And I knew one of them because he lived up the street from me. When I told my father, he said, "Get in the car," and drove me right to that kid's house. And then he said, "You need to go tell that kid that you want your bike back." Now, as a kid, of course, you're in a weird predicament there. I was pretty sure that if I did this, I was going to get my butt kicked at school by the whole lot of them. But I mustered up the courage, walked up to the door, and told the kid, "I know you know who took my bike, and I want it back." Now, to be fair, this wasn't really a bad kid. Actually, he was probably a kind of Jackie himself. The next day at school, though, he brought over one of the bigger kids to confront me, and they both threatened to beat me up. And I basically just stood, flat-faced to them, and said nothing. And you know what? I didn't get beat up. I didn't get my bike back either, but it was a moment. It was one of those moments that stay with you. You don't particularly like it, but you value it. If you're in a relationship, or maybe it's even something at work, that makes you feel like you're just getting bullied by someone, unless it's truly dangerous to do so, you need to know that it's okay to stand up for yourself. It's okay to say, "No, I don't think I'll be doing that today." You might lose your bike, but you'll gain something much more valuable. As for my rating, I'm going to give this one a middle tier. Mantel's acting certainly saves this one for me from being in the lower tier, especially the scene where he picks up his head out of his hands at the end and emerges as the brand new Jackie. That is a fantastic moment. But, there are also times when it's a bit long in the tooth, or at least it feels that way. However, I do always appreciate some of the camera tricks that the Twilight Zone employs, and I think this one is pretty successful with the two Jackies. But it's still not one of my favorites, and it certainly doesn't have to be a decent episode. Next time, we'll be taking a look at A Thing About Machines, and here are your questions to consider when watching the episode. Question 1. Are the machines just as bad as Finchley? Question 2. Can I get away with a mustache like Finchley's? Okay. The real question is, do you think Bartlett's reaction to machines will be something that more people trend toward in the not-too-distant future? And question 3, what are your moments of awe? I want to begin the announcements and shout-outs with a bit of bad news for our Twilight Zone community. The charming Jean Marsh passed away recently. Now, she had a wonderful career outside of the Twilight Zone, but for us, she will always be Alicia, the robot companion who gives Corey new life in The Lonely. Death is, of course, a part of our lives, and as I try to point out when any of our prominent actors pass away from this show we all love, we should all be so fortunate to leave behind something that touches as many people as she did with her Alicia character. Now, I've got a bit of a funny group-oriented comment to touch upon as well. After I released my King 9 Will Not Return episode, more than a handful of you pointed out how you felt like it had strong echoes with the first episode from Season 1, Where Is Everybody? Well, yet again, I have to say that this is why I love hearing your thoughts, because, and I'm just going to be honest, I didn't see that at all. Nope. It didn't come into my head once as I was watching and rewatching the episode and then writing and rewriting the episode draft. But as soon as you all started commenting on it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. You're right. All of you. The tone, the atmosphere, even the premise itself is pretty darn close. Now, I think they certainly can stand on their own with their differences as episodes, but I just didn't see it until you all pointed it out. And now I can't unsee it. So, keep the comments coming. You're really pushing me to think about these episodes in new ways. You can continue our conversations by heading over to our Discord server and either starting a conversation about this episode or taking part in one that is already happening. The link to join the server should be in the episode notes section. You can also head over to thekeyofImagination.com where you can rate this episode, learn more about me, watch previous episodes of the show, and check out my Curios page where I showcase some of the Twilight Zone trinkets I've bought over the years. I encourage people to email me thoughts and comments, whether it's about a particular Twilight Zone episode, your rating for an episode, or about the Key of Imagination show. You can get those to me as a text email, an audio clip, or even a video clip of roughly no more than 5 minutes to keyofimaginationsshow@gmail.com. Keep in mind, even though we talk about some serious topics, we're trying to maintain as family-friendly of an atmosphere as we can. And if you would rather I not use your comments on the show, please indicate that so I can respect your decision. If you enjoyed the show, I ask that you please take a moment and do one, if not all, of the following to help build our community. Rate the show, review the podcast, leave comments, thumbs up, all of the usual algorithmic gymnastics. That will help get the show in front of more people and help us build our community of Twilight Zone fans. However, even if you do none of that, and you absolutely hated every minute of this, I'm still going to thank you for spending some time with me. Until next time, remember, all doors are open to those who possess the key of imagination.